In fact, they came from some of the most unexpected labs. For example, our ventilator was designed and eventually the technology was transferred by National Aerospace Laboratory in Bangalore, which is a CSR constituent laboratory. And prior to this, the National Aerospace Laboratory, or we call it abbreviated NAL, had no expertise really in biomedical instrumentation. But they were able to do that only because they collaborated with our biology labs, who continuously provided feedback to them on what kind of parameters should go in a good ventilator. And what you see in the market today is a ventilator called Swasth Vayu that is being manufactured, and we have just received an order of 1200 ventilators from Delhi government. So that actually brings on in focus the value of interdisciplinary collaborations in any coordinated projects. And the Indian Cancer Genome Atlas project, being a very large coordinated project, we must bear that in our mind that there is an enormous value of bringing people from diverse disciplines together onto one platform with one single focus. I do hope that ICGA would be successful because I do see there are people who are from very different disciplines. I have personally interacted with some of the top rated medical practitioners in the country in this area. I personally know some of the best genomic scientists in the country who have agreed to participate. And I personally know some of the best brains in the world in areas of machine learning and control theory who also have agreed to participate in this consortium. I have therefore no doubt that the entire consortium has actually all the recipe in right place for a good success in the coming time. So my best wishes to everyone who have started this particular consortium and look forward to the data that comes out of it. I would now like to come to certain pitfalls that we may like to avoid in future, or certain general remarks about how large coordinated projects are conducted around the world. The large experiments carrying out in coordination with each other is relatively new to the field in biology. However, it has been prevalent in many areas of physics and engineering. We all know that experiments such as the Large Hadron Collider would not have been possible without many physicists around the world collaborating with each other on these kind of experiments. And typically, if you look at a paper that comes from either LHC or a particle physicist where they have conducted experiments together, that paper's first 2 pages are devoted only to the author list. And that gives a flavor of how different people work together on that particular defined problem. But the beauty of large conducted instruments is that the problems are extremely well defined. The goals are very well defined. And people know what they want to find out. Right? So once the problem is well defined, and once the entire group of scientists, whether it be in tens or hundreds or even thousands, if they are well aligned with that goal, then these programs go on very well. It has also flavors of both very hierarchical structure as well as very democratic structure. In terms of hierarchical, the projects are then coordinated by either a single person or a group of people who keep continuously taking decisions on which way the experiments are going and what new experiments need to be added and need to be conducted. In terms of democratical structure, there are also many people involved in general decision making, but also many people involved in actual design of new experiments. And that is democratizing this coordination among different people. So both these coexist in coordinated projects. And it has to be recognized once again very early on that both the facts, what typically in the management parlance we would call as top-down as well as bottoms-up, are both integral part of these coordinated projects. And it would be actually important for the ICGA to bear in mind this particular aspect that can have colors of both in the ICGA consortium. In terms of the biology large coordinated projects, The classic examples, of course, and the most visible examples to the mankind are the Human Genome Consortium that took place about 25, 30 years ago and eventually culminated in sequencing a few human genomes for the first time about 20 years ago. And that's a fantastic example that how people across continents collaborated with each other in conducting the human genome experiment. Once again, the goal was set that they were going to sequence the entire genome. And the task was cut out for different groups. For example, one group would sequence one particular chromosome, another group would sequence another chromosome, some groups would focus on particular regions of the chromosomes, and so on and so forth. And the task was divided among different groups. But it is one way of looking at different coordination among different people, that the tasks are separated between different groups of people. That you do this, one does that, and another group does something else. And then the democratization happens at the group level. Within the different groups, the people are empowered to do how they would actually go about it, which kind of method they would like to use, and how they would actually eventually compile the entire genome. Eventually, the analysis teams also come together, and analysis teams' focus would be to analyze the data that comes out of this entire business. So all of it actually gives a very good flavor of how we come together and address a problem. Now, in India, our participation has been very strong over the last several years as far as the physics community is concerned. Whether the square kilometer array, or whether the ITER project that is happening in France right now, or even some of the particle physics projects where Indians have very actively participated. And the participation is of two different kinds. For example, in many of the projects at CERN, Indians can go there as users of the CERN facility. Whereas in ITER, India has taken particular responsibility to manufacture some of the magnets and some of the power supplies to ITER, so that Indian scientists are actively involved in the design and fabrication of these components. The design and fabrication allows not only Indian scientists to develop that particular capability in the country, but also allows Indian industry to come forward and start manufacturing those components. And that's a hallmark of ITER, that India's participation in ITER has been that particular one. Similarly, in the square kilometer array, there are several control systems that Indians are involved in fabricating and designing. And also the software is being designed by some of the Indian software giants. So that's another way of participation, that we bring value on the board by what we can do in a very well-defined subcomponent of this large coordinated project. However, we don't have too many examples from India where we have participated in large international coordinated projects in the biological arena. And I think ICGA offers to change that particular perception. There are many programs which are going around the world, whether it be it a Phantom program in Japan, or whether it be the International Brain Imaging Consortium, or many other things where we ought to participate and bring value from India's perspective into these programs. ICGA, I hope, will allow the Indian biological community to change that perception. One program that was conducted a few years ago was the Indian Genome Variation, and I must say that it was a very successful program that was conducted once again with the leadership of CSIR, where many different kinds of single nucleotide polymorphisms were mapped onto the human genome, so that we could actually understand the genome variation in the Indian population. To a large extent, ICGA also goes in the same direction as the Indian Genome Variation Program. What we would like to see is, are there any specific mutations that are unique to India's population? You all know that India's population is very unique in many different senses. And to understand different diseases, the susceptibility of population to those, and even more importantly, the susceptibility of or the sensitivity or resistance of potential drugs against therapies also can be addressed using this particular ICGA program. It's well known that around the world people now, as a standard of therapy in many cancer types, map the mutations of a patient before actually deciding what course of therapy to decide. And the classic case, of course, whether tyrosine kinase inhibitors have to be given to a person with EGFR mutation or not. That's a very standard thing in many parts of the world. It has not become a standard of practice in India yet. And we do hope by a consortia like this, and from the results that come out of ICGA in India too, we will be able to bring that as a standard of practice, that before really deciding the course of therapy of a person, the genomic variations are mapped and then a suitable therapy is then given to the affected person. I do hope that this will bring a lot of value to the people of India. I do hope this will bring a lot of value to the world of science. And I do hope that we'll understand this dreaded disease much better than in the past. My very best wishes to all of you on this particular occasion. It's a very exciting initiative, and I personally look forward to seeing the progress of this in the coming time. Thank you all very much. Best wishes to all. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mande, for your words of hope, encouragement, and keen observations on scientific team building across different streams of science in India from your rich experience in this area. I am sure all of us here have learned substantially and will keep learning from you as we move ahead with our endeavor in ICGA. Ladies and gentlemen, I am told that Honorable Minister is waiting for giving his speech. So without further delay, I would like to start the proceedings of the inauguration by our Honorable Minister. Before that, a few words. It is my honor and privilege to welcome Honorable Dr. Vardhan ji, Minister of Science and Technology and Vice President, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, Government of India, to inaugurate the conference. Dr. Vardhan is recognized both in India and globally for his enormous efforts towards eradicating polio by mass immunization with almost single-minded devotion. Dr. Vardhan also pioneered the initiation and implementation of essential drug program of WHO, launched of hepatitis B immunization program, the Delhi Research Center for Modernized Promotion of Ayurveda, traditional medicine, and the Healthy City project being undertaken by his ministry. He is also recipient of the President's Special Award of Appreciation from the Indian Medical Association. It is a matter of great encouragement for us, sir, that you were able to take time out on a particularly busy day to inaugurate this conference. This underlines the importance of the conference and also fills us with renewed enthusiasm in the days to come and in the challenges to overcome. With these words, once again, I extend a warm welcome to all of you and invite Dr. Vardhan ji for his inaugural address.
I am happy to be in the middle of such a large gathering of oncologists, researchers, and academicians from India, United States of America, United Kingdom, and Bangladesh. All of you, I understand, have gathered here to discuss modalities of working together to find more customized solutions to treat cancer. It is my privilege to inaugurate this international conference. I reiterate the commitment of Government of India to reduce the burden of cancer in the country by employing latest technologies in genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and artificial intelligence and machine learning mediated data analysis. Diverse molecular mechanisms, including individual genetic and lifestyle factors, contribute to cancer. These pose significant challenges to treatment. Therefore, it is necessary to better understand the underlying factors patient by patient. With this in mind, many developed countries have invested significant public resources in high impact multidisciplinary cancer research specific to local contexts. India is unique in so many ways. It is important, therefore, that we create indigenous open source and comprehensive database of molecular profiles of all cancers prevalent in the Indian population. I am happy to learn about your efforts in this direction. It makes me especially proud that a consortium of scientists and clinicians from across the world have joined to build an Indian Cancer Genome Atlas. Success of the endeavor depends on the uniformity and integrity of specimens representing different parts of India. I urge you to focus on these important issues that will make the Indian Cancer Genome Atlas useful for clinicians throughout India and thereby ultimately benefit a cancer patient by making treatment both more accessible and affordable in India. Our government remains fully committed to this cause. Through the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, Department of Biotechnology, and the Department of Science and Technology, we have initiated large-scale mission mode projects such as Genome India, IndiGene, Cancer Genomics, Nutrition Mission, etc. All of these are with the aim of improving clinical outcomes in cancer and other chronic diseases. Yet another step towards Atmanirbhar Bharat. I wish all the best for the deliberations and I look forward to receiving a summary of the outcome of this important international conference.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. It is indeed an unique opportunity for us to engage actively for a self-reliant Atmanirbhar Bharat through indigenous advances in healthcare. Thank you very much from all of us. We feel encouraged today in participating in this endeavor and from your encouraging words. Thank you, sir. I'm told that we'll have a small change in the program as Professor Mande probably needs to leave in a few minutes. So, preceding Dr. Zenklusen's talk, I thought it would be nice for all the participants here because we have such luminaries today on the session, Dr. Zenklusen and Dr. Professor Mande, both spearhead large initiatives. Dr. Zenklusen in the United States of America, Professor Mande in India. So a conversation, a brief conversation between them will be of much looked forward to event of today's session. So Professor Mande and Dr. Zenklusen, I hope both of you are able to hear me. And Dr. Mande, are you there? So probably, I think he had to leave. I'm not sure. So well, especially with with the inauguration speech by the minister, it's a little last minute adjustments have to be done, and so what we will do is just one second. What we will do then is move on to the next speaker of today afternoon, today's session. Our next speaker brings forth another dimension to this conference, centered around team science. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jean-Claude Zenklusen director of the Cancer Genome Atlas, commonly known as TCGA to most of us, of the National Cancer Institute, will be giving his keynote address on the Cancer Genome Atlas, a model for team science. Dr. Genklusen, as scientific director of the Office of Cancer Genomics, oversaw a variety of large-scale projects and therefore brings to us rich experience of immense value to this conference, where we are partnering across a wide variety of expertises, and his view, his experience has a lot for us to learn from. Dr. Genklusen, over to you.
Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to talk to you in this keynote. I'm going to try to give you a little perspective on the history of the Cancer Genome Atlas, but also what have we learned about team science while performing this project. Unfortunately, because of this pandemic, I cannot be there in person. We were 2 years ago, and we love Pune, and I would love to be there again. But hey, it is what it is. Eventually, this virus will be conquered, and we will be able to meet in person. Still, I think it's important for us to launch this pan-India cancer project because I think there's a lot to learn about the cancer perspective from the Indian population, and so I'm very happy that the project is having the support from the Indian government. And so let me tell you how we did it in the US, which doesn't mean that it's the way you have to do it in India. You have to have your own project and do it in the Indian way. But there's certain things that we learned about in science, in biomedical sciences, that I think they could be useful. So the first thing I want to show you is the timeline of TCGA. And one thing you will notice is that the project took about 12 years to be completed. We started in 2006 with the permission to start the pilot phase, which were GBM, ovarian, and lung cancer, lung adenocarcinoma. The first project took a while. Let's say it took 2.5 years to get the GBM report, and the reason was because nobody had done it before, and we really didn't know how to do it. It took a while to figure out how the sequencing was supposed to be done, how the analysis was supposed to be done, what was the model for authorship, and so we learned a lot, and then as we kept producing reports and kept producing projects, we figured out that some things that we had learned were wrong and had to be changed. And so what happened was we got a big expansion on the project in 2010 to 35 tumor types. Originally, we ended up doing 33. And the reason for that was because we got a big infusion of funds due to the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, which was a reaction to the 2008 financial crisis. And so the Obama administration tried to maintain the economy going by funding projects that were shovel-ready. They were ready to be to produce and use the money, and TCGA was at that phase at that moment. During the expansion phase, we understood that we needed specialized genome data analysis centers. We had more benchmark papers, which I'm going to describe in a little while. We did some FFP protocols, which now are proving to be extremely useful because we are doing a lot of clinical trial projects that are FFP cases, not frozen as we did in TCGA. And then from 2015 to 2016, we basically completed the analysis. We published all the papers, or the vast majority of the papers that were marker papers, basically single tumor analysis paper. And then then in 2017 and 2018, we work on our PanCan analysis, which basically coalesced all the data from all the tumor types and tried to identify commonalities and differences. And I think it has been very useful for the user to have this comparison across tumors. They were all published in early spring of 2018 in Cell journals, and it has been really a very rewarding experience to be part of this project. The network, the TCGA network, the original one, and then pretty much the new one is described here. It was distributed all over North America, not just in the two coasts. And in fact, we had one center that was based in British Columbia. Samples came from 16 different countries, so it was not just North American samples. And the number of people that participated at one time or another on the project was in the high 700s. People had participated in the project from the very beginning until the end, and some people just came for one project because they were interested in that tumor type, and then they left. All the contributions were obviously useful. TCGA produced a large amount of data, 2.5 petabytes. A petabyte is something that people have problems grasping how much it is, and so we translated that into number of DVDs. Basically, if you put 1 petabyte of data in DVDs, you get 212,000 DVDs. So the 2.5 petabytes are something along the lines of 700,000 DVDs, which is an enormous amount of data. This data is describing 33 tumor types, 10 of them being rare cancers, 11,000 plus 11,000 patients is really 11,523 if we want to be exact. 7 different data types that represent each one of these tumors, and we have done the same data types for all the tumors available. And we keep generating data on those tumors as the platforms and either new platforms show up, like ATAC-seq, or platforms that were extremely expensive at the beginning, like whole genome sequence, have become available at reasonable pricing. And so we are using these samples to generate whole genome sequence on all of them, because we do believe that type of data is going to be important. So although the project is basically done, we keep using the samples for novel data generation as they appear and as the financials make sense. We are just launching an effort, a pilot effort, to produce single-cell sequence on these samples, and if that pilot works well, we probably are going to get funded to do them in all the cases, because again, there's a lot of information to be gleaned by these new technologies. All the projects, and this is a genomic characterization pipeline that was finalized and put together in a stable format around 2014. But all the projects from TCGA, but also the projects that are being done through my office for clinical trials, are following basically these basic steps, and these basic participants are part of our systems. We have up there the tissue source sites, which are the ones that give us the samples and give us the clinical data. That moves to the biospecimen core resource, which does two things. It cleans up and standardizes the clinical data and sends it to the genomic data commons, and also produces the analytes that go to the genomic characterization centers. At the moment, we have 4 of them. They're basically sequencing centers that specialize in different aspects of sequencing. And then the data generated by the genomic characterization centers go to the genome data commons, where it gets aligned, and they get called by a variety of pipelines. Depending on the data type, there's 1, 3, 4 7 pipelines. Once that data is produced, then the genomic data analysis network together with the clinical disease experts generate the analysis. Basically, we call that group the junction of clinical experts with the molecular expert. We call that an analysis working group, and they are the ones that generate the primary data analysis for these cases, and then the results get published, but also they get sent back to the genomic data commons, at which point all the data, the primary data plus the analyzed data, get exposed to the research community, because our analysis is just a preliminary analysis. It's the description of the data, and it's by no means exhaustive. And so we want the research community to access the data and produce their own analysis and produce their own hypothesis and generate new experiments that can prove or disprove the hypothesis, because that is the only way we are going to be really able to understand what cancer is. So this is a pretty graph, I think it's pretty, of all the publications from TCGA. You can see at the very beginning there were a couple of publications happening, and then there were years in which we had no publications because we were learning the process. But then as the years progressed, and I would say from 2014 on, maybe 2013 on, our production became very streamlined, and we were able to produce a fair amount of marker papers and manuscripts on each tumor types. And you see in 2018 there's a large number of publications, which are basically publications from the PanCan analysis, except for the last one in Science, that is the ATAC-seq paper. But the vast majority of those are the PanCan analysis, in which we analyzed all these tumor types together to try to find commonalities and to try to find differences, which I think is a good resource for the data users, because it is kind of a compendium of everything that we did, looking at it from different aspects, which is, I've been told, very useful. So as I said, the number of people in the team were large. There were more than 700 researchers that participated in the Cancer Genome Atlas during its 12 years of existence. Some participated from the very beginning to the end. Some came only from one project and then left. Some came from one project and thought that the model was very interesting, and they stayed for the rest of the duration. So we had a variety of experiences in the team. 16 countries were represented, mostly through sample contribution, but there were also different analysis groups that heard of what we were doing, and they requested to participate in the analysis. And we have been nothing if open. We always have told people that wanted to participate and to contribute that they were welcome. This was not a country club. This was not a closed environment. We always have been very, very open to people joining us. And in fact, I had more than one experience where somebody came to me in a meeting and said, "Oh, I'm interested in tumor X, Y, and Z. How can I participate?" And my answer was, "It's easy. You just send me an email, and then I'm going to tell the people that manage the analysis working group to put you in there." And they go, "Okay, so that's the only thing I need to do?" And I go, "Yeah, don't I have to provide data?" "No, we have the data. We need people to do the analysis." And so people were very surprised, because these type of projects normally are closed in, but we have been always very open, because we do believe that there's enough data for 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as many research to analyze, and still there will be facets of the data that we need to look and understand and analyze. So the basis of this is, whoever wants to participate, we always welcome. There are some requirements to the participants, of course. The participants must understand that they don't do the project for their own benefits. As the Americans many times say, there is no I in team, and this is absolutely true. The goals of the projects are the important thing. It's not your fame, your fortune, your research. The recognition that one gets from this project comes as a result of the success of the project, but not as a personal name in a paper, because in fact most of the papers were actually have a single author, which was the network. Participants must be flexible in adapting to the needs of the project. They may think that they are the best experts on a certain facet, and then somebody else actually knows the facet better. And so they need to be able to contribute, and they need to be able to work outside their comfort level and understand that they may not be the ones calling the shot, but they are always recognized as being part of the team and valued as being part of the team. And I think this is something that has kept some people away from our projects, which is that participants must agree that they don't own the data or the data generated for the primary data through their group's analysis. The data is owned by the project and it will be distributed freely at the appointed time. They cannot use the data for their own benefit while the project is being analyzed. Once the data gets published, everybody is free to use the data for whatever they want, but they cannot they cannot scoop the group. Nobody can take the data and say, I did this analysis, this is mine, I will publish it on my own. It has happened only twice in the long years, and those people obviously were excluded from any work, any future work, because they were not team players. And so basically, as you can see from here, the requirements to be a participant is to be able to be a team player and not just a very successful scientist. What are the keys to success that we have had in this project? How did we make these team projects successful? Well, the first thing is that the rules and expectations of the projects must be clearly defined at the outset and kept throughout the duration. New or modified rules can be set if needed, because you learn that, things that we thought it was going to work, it doesn't work. But it cannot be capricious. It cannot be just because, we don't like this anymore, we need to change it. And when you enact changes, you have to explain to the group why are you doing the change, and you have to be consistent with it. And then part of that consistency is point number 2, which the rules must be written. It cannot be that, I have it in my head, and so when somebody comes with a question, I just issue the ruling out of nowhere, because you need to have the things in writing. We call that a charter. In physical sciences, in particle physics, they call it the Constitution, which is a very detailed document. How detailed you want to do it, that's up to you. But I would recommend that you have the rules in writing. And the most important thing, I think, is that they are applied to all participants equally, with no exceptions, because personal relationships with the project leader. It doesn't matter if I like you or if I don't like you. The rules are the rules, and the rules are the same for everybody. And that avoids a lot of conflict. If the rules are capricious and they're changing according to my will, my whim, my liking or not liking you, then the project is not going to be successful, because people are going to start resenting the differential treatment, and they're going to leave. And we need everybody in order for these projects to work well. I think one of the things that is vital for success on this type of large projects is a central managing entity. Teams that are mismanaged, not managed as a confederation, are not efficient and leads to conflict. The central management structure is the honest broker. Basically, we at my office, at the program office, we have no skin in the game other than making the project successful. We are not going to get more salary. We are not going to get promoted. We are just there to make sure that the project gets to the goals that it has to be. And so having that type of structure that has no tenure possible, no, as I said, no promotion possible, helps the others that have those concerns understand that what the decisions that are made by the central organizing entity are not capricious, they're not for their benefit, they're just for the benefit of the project. And I have seen projects managed in both ways, in a confederate way and in a central way. And I must say, I always get pats in the back from people that manage confederation saying, wow, you guys really know how to do this. And my answer to them is like, well, but that's the thing. The people that are doing the management are not people that directly benefit out of it. And so we have the project in mind, not our careers in mind. The second block of take-home messages for keys of success of teen science are that data belongs to the group until publications. Then it belongs to humanity. Nobody can claim ownership of anything generated by the project or use it for personal research until the data is publicly available. And that way, we are concentrating on getting to the goals of the project and not how can I use this data to advance my research. That comes after publication. All parts of the project must be considered equally valuable. Sample and clinical data procurement, molecular characterization, data analysis, database generation, manuscript preparation, they are all equally valuable. And because no one facet, none of these steps can occur without the others. I cannot characterize samples if I don't get them from the tissue source site. I cannot do the data analysis if the molecular characterization doesn't happen, and so on. And so the point here is all contributions to the projects are equally valuable and are recognized as such. And this allows for people to feel valued and to want to continue in the project. If any of these parts is considered less important than the others, then they're going to go somewhere else and do something else because they don't feel recognized for their work. One thing that is absolutely necessary is that all the data needs to be stored in a centrally managed repository until released. All intermediary analysis must be stored in the same place. And the reason I say this is because this is the only way that the entire team can see all the data in real time. Communications that happen on the side are not efficient because only a subgroup of the network is able to see them. It creates jealousy, it creates conflict, it creates miscommunication, and so the fact that you put all the data in one place and everybody has access to it allows for people to understand that, yes, we are all partners in this. There's nobody that is more important than any other. And they also understand that the data is privileged and they should not be using it and they should not be giving it to people that are not part of the team, because that way we can control data access, which is essential for these projects to be a success. So these are all the things that I believe people need to understand from the very beginning in order for having a successful team. But also, you need to say exactly what are the benefits to the participants, because otherwise, they're not going to invest all the time. So the participants that have actively contributed to the projects are recognized in all publications. The authorship criteria, and you have to decide how you want to do it for the Indian project, but we were very generous and to avoid any resentment and facilitate future participation. Participation in this large-scale team science opens the door for future participants to get recognized as leaders in the field, even when the papers were under the name only of the network, because they are all listed as authors in PubMed, and so they are recognized as such. And I think one of the biggest advantages, and people don't realize until they actually been in these large projects for a while, is that your research network expands immensely. Now you are talking to, say, you are a clinician, you are talking to bioinformaticians, you are talking to the molecular people, you are talking to pathologists that you may never have talked to, you are talking to image analysis, and what happens is that your network expands incredibly, and now next time you need help with any project on your own, you have a pool of people with different abilities that you can call to help. And this is a big deal, because we tend to be in scientific silos, and so the ability to extend your sphere of influence is probably the least thought of, but the most important benefit of this type of projects. With that, I would like to show the people in my office that work tirelessly so I can come and talk to you. John Benchok is our clinical data guru. He makes sure that all the clinical data is correct. Martin is our compliance expert. He knows all the rules about sharing patient data everywhere in the world, and so he's the one that I always say he keeps me out of jail. Roy Tarmater has abundant experience in generation of analytes and biobanking, and so he manages all the PCR aspects. Zining Wang, he is our database and bioinformatics expert. He is, I'll say, 90% responsible for the GDC being what it is. Lining Yang knows more of sequencing than I care to, and I know a lot, but he knows a lot more than I do. And he manages the sequencing contract. And then Julia Stang and Ina Selao are the two very dedicated ladies that managed the analysis working group and made possible all the publications. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I will be at the live session if you have any questions. But for the moment, I bid you farewell. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Jankushan, from all of us, for sharing your frontline experience in workings of a large-scale projects in cancer, where I think we continuously strive to bridge the gap between the clinic and the research. So making large teams, keeping them motivated, avoiding conflict. These are, I think, major keywords or major operational words of any successful consortium that delivers. And very rightly said, if the focus is on the project and not individual, then I think much of the conflict and resentment can be avoided. Thank you so much for sharing all this, all your experiences. I would like to open the session for questions for a few minutes at least. And please feel free to ask your question or post it on the chat. And I'm sure Dr. Jankushan will be happy to take them. So if there are any questions, please go ahead. Let me ask, while I think, Dr. Jankushan, one question that comes to my mind when I think about it, when you look back, what would you think was one of the biggest challenges while you moved ahead, and what would be, and what do you think could have been done to avoid something like that? What was
I think the biggest challenge was getting the samples, most definitely. It was quite difficult to get the samples. And I think that there was nothing we could have done to avoid it, because with the technologies that we had at the time, we needed a large amount of sample and samples of high cellularity, which obviously are difficult to obtain. They needed to be frozen. FFPE sequencing was not even a thought on the mind of anybody. And also we needed not only the tumor, but the normal counterpart. And many cases that had been stored just as the piece of tumor with no blood, with no clinical data regarding. So it was quite difficult to get samples of the quality that we needed. I think one of the big legacies of TCGA is the fact that now it's not the case. In everybody's mind, it's very clear that if you're going to bank a sample, you need to have consent, you need to have the sample itself, you need to have the non-tumor counterpart, you need to have the metadata on how the sample was acquired. So all of those things, now people think, oh, well, that's obvious, you have to do that, but it wasn't, 14, 15 years ago, it was a rare thing. And so, we always talk about TCGA data, but I think, the protocols and the change in the community thinking of what a sample is, the change on the community thinking of what sharing data is, I think those are as important an aspect of TCGA legacy as the data itself.
Mm-hmm. One question that I commonly face is that in an Indian scenario, I don't know how much of a challenge that is in the United States, is about follow-up, going after patients. Some of them
that's the bane of my existence. It is very difficult. Reason being, most of the time, is because people go to these high-level research institutions to get their treatment, but then they move back to their place of living, and they get the follow-up from regional clinics that are not connected to the place where the sample was acquired. And so getting the follow-up on these cases, unless they are in a clinical trial, which is what we are doing right now, it's quite difficult. In fact, people always say, TCGA could have more clinical data. And I always agree. I tell them, it's like, well, you're not telling me anything that I don't know already. But it's very difficult. We in fact, tried for the past 2 years to get more follow-up data on all the TCGA cases. And, we offer payment. Still, it's very difficult. We got very, very little additional data. And the additional data that we get was really not that relevant. And again, the reason is, people go to the centers, they get their tumor removed, they get, the therapy, and then they move back home. And we lose. So we have an item, a clinical data element that is called loss to follow-up. Basically, we cannot get them because we just lost them. And it's the most commonly used clinical data element because, people just don't live next to the hospital that is the one providing the sample.
Yeah, going forward, I think we presume that as a significant challenge in the Indian scenario also. I see an interesting question on the chat. Which was a challenge you thought would be easiest, but turned out to be the difficult one, and vice versa?
What we thought it was going to be the easiest thing to solve was the sample procurement. We said, well, once we tell the world that we're looking for these things, and at that time we were paying for the samples, but they're going to appear out of the thin air. Well, it wasn't the case. And in fact, we thought that people would realize that it's important to be in the project by the fact that the project is publicized. It wasn't the case. Many samples happened because of personal relationships, which we thought was going to be a minor event. So again, sample acquisition was our hardest thing, and we didn't think that it was going to be our hardest thing. And one of the things that we thought it was going to be very hard was, we were having all these people that were very successful scientists on their own, with their own large laboratories and with a lot of experience. And we were bringing them all together, not necessarily people that were accustomed to work with each other. And we thought, well, getting a network, not just a confederation of different labs, but a network together out of this is going to be a problem because, personalities and egos and all of that stuff that I know scientists tend to be selfless and have no personal interest, but they do. And we thought that was going to be impossible. And actually that happened to be a lot simpler than we expected because the project goals were well defined. And as I said, everybody had the same rules. And so nobody, there were no favorites. And that people, I always say that TCGA is this phrase in the States called the roach motel, which is the place where, those little roach baits that the roaches go in and then they cannot come out. And I always say that TCGA is the scientific roach motel. Scientists have come to work on one particular aspect, on one particular project, and then they see how this works and how it develops. And they get enamored with the system and they stay. And so we have had people that come from one single tumor type. And then I get an email saying, hey, do you mind if I stay around? Because this is exciting. And so it is very interesting how, what you think is going to be difficult ends up being easy, and what you think is easy is going to be difficult. So I would say to the ICGA leadership, be prepared for anything, because you never know, in each country, the situations are different. And so you have to be prepared for anything.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Jan Klusen, for sharing this with us. And in the interest of time, I think this was a very interesting conversation. I'll have to cut it short in the interest of time. And we have lost some time behind. So moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound pleasure to welcome our final speaker of this session from Bangladesh, Dr. Syed Mudassir Ali.
Thank you very much for the...
Dr. Syed Mudassir Ali, Chairman of the Bangladesh Medical Research Council, Dhaka, will be delivering his keynote address on his experiences as head of the Medical Research Council of Bangladesh. Dr. Ali is currently the chairman of the governing body of the Dhaka City College, one of the oldest colleges in Bangladesh. Dr. Ali also serves as member of the board of directors of Beacon Pharmaceuticals, the first manufacturer of anti-cancer drugs in Bangladesh. Very interesting, Dr. Ali. Please, the podium is yours.
Good afternoon, friends. At this auspicious juncture of National Victory Month in Bangladesh, we have organized the second TCGA conference by your dear colleagues and friends from India. Is a significant milestone, and it touches our hearts because our Indian brothers shed their blood along with us for independence of our country in 1971 in this month. So I show this respect to our soldiers, people, and also the Indian soldiers who gave their life for our independence. Today, it is a special occasion. I also remember the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, under whose leadership we got our independence. And he was a visionary leader who set up thinking about this biomedical research, this Bangladesh Medical Research Council, BMRC. Since inception, we are serving the national focal agency in health matters. Based on certain data in Bangladesh, it is clear that rising the cancer burden is similar with our country and with India. That's why our collaboration is very relevant and it will be helpful and mutually beneficial. In this context, I strongly believe that Indo-Bangladesh cancer research collaboration are timely, important, and you have taken an excellent step for this. The Center Genome Atlas TCGA program of NIH NCI in South Asia region will be a great example for the rest of the developing world. I thank all the organizers who have taken this struggle to organize particularly this webinar. The Honorable Prime Minister, People's Republic of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, has given a special priority to SDG 3 to bring nation's health system to world-class level. The goal of SDG 3 and relative initiative taken by the Honorable Prime Minister will create a favorable environment to enable these TCGA goals. In this regard, BMRC would like to express long-term support to undertake all necessary steps whenever it is necessary. I wish you great success of the second TCGA conference of Indo-Bangladesh Center Research Collaboration. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
Thank you, Professor Ali, for your words of encouragement and enthusiasm, hope. It fills with us with a lot of hope and encouragement when neighboring countries come together to learn and enrich each other through initiatives like this. With this, friends, we'll be closing this session. And I hope you had a nice time, enjoyed time, and enjoyed conversations and discussions and, in-depth conversations also. Thank you very much for joining us today. Signing off for this session. Thank you once again. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. This is Santosh Dixit. We are sorry we are running 10 minutes late, but we will try to cover up in future sessions. I think we go into our next session immediately, and it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Lieutenant General Dr. Madhuri Kanitkar. She will be the chair of the next session. I think it is very rare that we have such a dignitary amongst us. She is the current Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff, and in her capacity, she overlooks the entire medical corps of Armed Forces Medical Services of India. She serves on the Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Council, and she has been a trailblazer in her own capacity by creating very unique service models in various medical locations across the country. And for all this work, she has been awarded a GOC Commendation Card and received many accolades. So over to Dr. Kanitkar. Madam, you already have the rights to share the screen if you would wish to.
So before firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to chair this session. And the lights have gone out, so you can't see me. But in this galaxy of specialists and super specialists and working so much, doing yeoman work in field of cancer, I'm but a benign pediatrician in a military uniform. And I would like to start this with just sharing this video. It's just a short clip, but I thought it was important when the theme of this whole conference is collaborative work. And I have spent most of my time in trying to see how to align medical education and research for public health. And in that, it's so important that clinicians like us collaborate very closely with the galaxy of scientists available working in pure sciences, because cancer is moving away from the clinician and our classical histopathology to more of genomics, markers, and precision medicine. So look at the effect of collaboration. I thought this was a good way to start. And for this session today, I have a team of speakers. It's a literal who's who stars who have worked in close association with a large number of subjects. And to begin, we would have a session with 5 speakers. Each speaker would be given 15 minutes, and we'll try to stick to the time, and followed by 5 minutes of question answers. I won't go back to introducing each speaker because we begin at the start. We have Dr. Suzanne Stanway, who's a consultant in medical oncology at London, UK, who would be speaking on Indo-UK collaborative cancer control. This would be followed by Dr. Rodrigo Dienstern, who was a medical director for oncoclinics at Sao Paulo, Brazil, and a leader of oncology data science group at the Oncology Institute in Barcelona, Spain, who would be speaking on evolving landscapes of genomic biomarkers for precision oncology. At number 3, we have Dr. Shekhar Sheshagiri, the president of Genome Research Foundation from India, who's speaking on the Genome Asia 100K, a genome resource for cancer research and precision medicine, followed by Dr. C.S. Pramesh, the director of our own Tata Memorial Hospital, speaking on National Cancer Grid of India, eliminating disparities in cancer care, which is so important. And to end, we have none other than Dr. Preeta Rajaraman, who would speak on Indo-US cancer research collaboration. So I have purposely put this as a continuous cycle. Because these galaxies would be getting us together, because at the end of the day, I love to say that path from illness to wellness is when the I is removed and replaced by a we. Thank you so much, and let us start with our meeting. I request the first speaker to take on. Thank you.
Hello there. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in your conference today. My name is Susie Stanway and I am a medical oncologist working in London, UK. I have a real interest in global oncology, which is essentially about closing the divide on cancer outcomes between countries, ensuring equity of access to evidence-based high-value cancer care across the continuum. I'm going to talk today a little bit about epidemiology and policy, a little bit about the cancer care continuum, because it's so important that care spans the continuum, and a few examples of how I got involved and how I see things improving in the future. So this is a wonderful letter that Satish Gopal, the recently appointed head of the NCI Centre for Global Health, wrote to the New England Journal of Medicine. He wrote it off the back of President Obama's 2016 State of the Union address. And this was reflecting on the cancer moonshots to improve cancer care in the United States. And Satish was working in Malawi at the time, and he said that I don't see all these improvements that you're talking about. I work in a country of 17 million people. Women, the leading cause of female cancer death is cervical cancer, where the average woman has had symptoms for over a year when she presents. And this is a preventable cancer. We've had a vaccine for over 10 years. Why is this happening? And he goes on to make a couple of really important points. Funding cancer programs solely through research grants can have distorting effects on agendas. And then he also goes on to say that what ultimately transformed HIV in sub-Saharan Africa from an existential threat to a prototypical global health success story was not just research, but was broad civil society activism and political will. And then he gives the powerful words at the end: shooting for the moon is important, but so is shooting for a world that's just and equitable. So if we look at the 196 countries across the world, you can see here they're divided up into the World Bank definitions of high, middle and low income countries. You can see we know that different countries spend different amounts on healthcare. So most high-income countries spend about 12.3% of GDP on healthcare, and low and middle-income countries spend about 4% on healthcare. And this is important as a backdrop. And you can see here that the majority of countries are low and middle income countries. And the concept of conflict must also be taken into consideration, because there's over 1 billion people globally that live in areas of conflict, which upsets healthcare delivery. So non-communicable diseases now account for 67% of deaths in low and middle income countries, and cancer is one of the leading causes. So there's 9.6 million deaths globally from cancer in 2018, the second cause of death. And the fastest rise is seen in low and middle income countries. And you can see here from these two pie charts that the biggest burden is seen in Asia. So if you look here at the top cancer incidence rates for women, you can see here that breast cancer is the most, has the highest incidence. One person is diagnosed globally a minute from breast cancer, and you can also see here in orange in sub-Saharan Africa, predominantly this is cervical cancer. And this is a travesty, because this is, as I said before, a preventable cancer that should not be killing women in these numbers anymore. It's important to note also that the WHO, the week before last, launched their global cervical cancer eradication strategy. And so hopefully going forward, if we all work together as a global community, these statistics will improve. This is the age standardised mortality rates for all cancers for women. And you can see here that in high income countries such as Australia and North America, we see here that lung cancer is number one. And this is important because 80% of the world's smokers, 80% of the world's billion smokers live in low and middle income countries, and policies need to be altered to protect these people, such as fiscal policies. This is the map for men, and it's just important to note that this is data taken from Jobacan, the IARC website. And you can see here that non-melanomatous skin cancer is common, and in South America and sub-Saharan Africa, you can see here prostate cancer. And moving on here to the causes of mortality, one can see here for India, that's lip and oral cavity cancer, predominantly related to lifestyle factors such as tobacco and betel is important. And also you can see here the variations such as Mozambique, the light pink in Africa, is Kaposi's sarcoma is the leading cause for mortality. So I treat breast cancer, so I have an interest in global oncology and global breast cancer. Yes, we are seeing increasing incidence of breast cancer in low and middle income countries. This is multifactorial, relating to ageing populations, changes in reproductive behaviour, population growth and rising awareness, for example. But one of the really sad things that we see is the higher mortality to incidence ratios in low and middle income countries compared to high income settings. And it's a travesty really that your likelihood of surviving breast cancer is related to geography, to where you're born. And if you're born in a poorer country and diagnosed with breast cancer, you're more likely to die from it. And if you're diagnosed in a high income country, you're more likely to survive it. And this equity disparity really needs to be improved. This is Dr. Tedros, the current Director General of the WHO, who famously said that health is a political choice. And these are the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, 169 targets. And really, goal number 3 is important when it comes to cancer cancer elimination, but there are also some other goals which are also incredibly important, I think, in the context of this talk, particularly goal number 17, partnerships for the goals. This is a slide just showing cancer on the broader global health and development agenda, and I think it's important to highlight the 2015 adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals with the overarching health goal 3.4 to reduce mortality by non-communicable diseases by 30% by 2030. The cancer care continuum must be looked at. So we're not just talking here about getting high-cost drugs into more equitable access to people in low and middle-income countries. It's actually care across the continuum that needs to be improved, from prevention to palliative care. So prevention, for example, management of obesity, we know that this is a risk factor for postmenopausal breast cancer, for example, and also many other cancers. But for every dollar spent promoting healthy eating, $500 is spent on promoting unhealthy foods. And this clearly needs to be improved upon. We know that cancer has a different biology in different geographical settings. For example, we see more triple receptor negative breast cancer in certain countries such as sub-Saharan Africa. We know that the founder mutations for BRCA mutants are different in different countries. And we know that, for example, African American women who have hormone receptor positive HER2 negative breast cancer have a worse hazard of breast cancer death compared to non-Hispanic white women. So there's plenty of work that needs to be done. We know that in many low and middle income countries, women are presenting with breast cancer at a younger age. So, for example, in Western countries, the average age is between 60 and 70 years. In Asian countries, it's 40 to 50 years. And we know that young women face a particular set of challenges when diagnosed with breast cancer. They often take longer to diagnose because people think that they're younger and breast cancer is not likely to be a cause. It's harder to detect because their breasts are denser. They're more likely to be overtreated, more likely to have toxicity from treatment, and have other care and responsibilities, often such as children and parents. Coming on to diagnostics, the right diagnostic tool must be selected. We're not necessarily talking about high-cost tools such as PET scans, which in some cancers don't add much to diagnostics, but we're just talking about simple tools that we know work and are efficacious at diagnosing cancer. Surgery is, again, it's not just getting high-cost drugs into people, it's starting off with the basics. Less than 25% of patients worldwide get access to safe, affordable, timely surgery. And I would also highlight this TED Talk that was given by one of my colleagues, Professor Shailesh Shrikandi from Tata Memorial Hospital, which sets the scene wonderfully about unravelling excellence in cancer care across India and from a surgical perspective, which is a really great TED Talk. This is from a paper that Arnie Purushottam and Professor Richard Sullivan from the UK published in The Lancet Oncology, really highlighting that it makes more economical sense for a country to invest in cancer services than not. And so this is the cost of not investing in cancer surgery. And it really goes to show that we need to be liaising with health economists and with politicians and really dispelling this myth that cancer care is too expensive. Access to radiotherapy, again, hugely important. It's an essential treatment for 50% of cancer patients. And there was the establishment of this global task force by Felicia Moore, Mary Gospodarovich and others, and this Lancet publication. And this is a study, the START study, which was led by Professor John Yarnold in the UK, showing how successful or equal efficacy for hypofractionation of breast cancer radiotherapy. And I think that treatment minimisation and this being tested in randomised settings is hugely important when it comes to trying to reduce the costs of cancer care and how this may help cancer patients around the world. And I just put this slide up. I just thought it was wonderful that the theme for ASTRO this year was global oncology. So access to medicines is, of course, hugely important. The WHO has an essential medicines list, which is regularly updated. The latest iteration, 2019, when I last looked, had 46 drugs which were pertinent to breast cancer treatment. And I think that we need to work together as a global cancer community, a little bit like the HIV global community did so well, to improve access to drugs for our patients. And the use of generics and biosimilars, compulsory licensing, price discrimination, harnessing global mechanisms for pricing, financing and drug procurement is going to be hugely important. Access to palliative care, I can't stress how important this also is. 20 million people a year need access to palliative care. 80% of these are in low and middle income countries. And there's an 1,800-fold difference between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% of people in the world with respect to opioid use for pain and HIV and cancer, which is a terrible statistic. Involving civil society in different countries is also an imperative. There needs to be culturally appropriate messaging to dispel myths and reduce stigma, and creation of advocates who are so powerful at improving cancer care. How can we work together, high-income countries, low- and middle-income countries? Well, I think that guidelines developed in high-income countries may well not be appropriate for all settings. And Ben Anderson from Fred Hutch in the US has really led the way with guideline resource stratified guidelines, such that ASCO, NCCN, and others have looked at his methodology and come up with similar guidelines, which is really great to see. I've been involved with multiple projects over several years, working with colleagues such as Bhavna Saroi, who works in Chennai at the Apollo Centre, producing a Lancet paper on developing institutions for cancer care in low and middle income countries, from an education perspective with Royal College of Physicians in East Africa, and also from a research perspective, because 4% of global research and development is applicable to low resource settings. And this clearly needs to be addressed, and resource research infrastructure collaboratively developed. I've been fortunate enough to receive Global Challenge Research Fund grants for the last 3 years, and we've worked with colleagues in East Africa looking at how we can improve survivorship problems that women have in the survivorship setting who have had breast cancer, and also build knowledge and capacity around palliative care in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think that these partnerships can be incredibly powerful. They can influence policy, they're always bi-directional, and there's huge opportunity for personal growth and development, and it's been a real pleasure working with colleagues around the world. These partnerships must be sustainable. They must be respectful, flexible and open-minded with their relationships. They must be context appropriate, with a long-term strategy and involve co-design. So Angaraj, who's also speaking at this conference, and I are co-leading the development of a global oncology hub at the Institute of Cancer Research, which we hope will span many domains such as advocacy, research, education, pedagogy. This is a real team science. It involves scientists across many disciplines, basic scientists, pharmacologists, sociologists, implementation scientists, etc. And also social scientists, because we really need to understand the context well. We need to get economists on board. We need to work with politicians and advocates. This is London Global Cancer Week, which we ran off the back of an annual Cancer Control in Low and Middle Income Countries Day, which I set up at the Royal Society of Medicine in 2016. Last year ran for the first time. This year we had 22 meetings across a week, which was the week before last. We had interaction with many high-level international organisations such as United Nations agencies, WHO, IARC, Chatham House in the UK, the Commonwealth, and we really hope that by educating and working with advocates and scientists around the world, that equity with respect to cancer care and cancer outcomes can be improved. We've also set up a UK Global Oncology Network. I've put here the website, and this is really to try and bring together the talent and resources, enthusiasm of individuals and organisations in the UK to try and improve the situation globally with our global colleagues. I'd just like to finish with these 5 action points that were published in The Lancet by Franco Cavalli off the back of the 2017 World Oncology Forum. I think that we need to develop a clear cancer narrative with hope and a clear mission. There needs to be the creation of a diverse, inclusive social movement, a little bit like the HIV community did many decades ago. We need to ensure that there's sustainable financing. We need to ensure that there's advancing research, development and innovation which translates these global ambitions and shared priorities to local solutions. And there must be strong alignment with the global goals and initiatives, particularly with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals and the UHC movement. I'd like to finish with this slide. This is the Chinese symbols for Wei on the left and Xi on the right. Wei comes for danger. So these 2 words make up the concept of crisis. There is a danger that if we don't all work together, the poor, the vulnerable, the underserved in societies are going to be left behind. But there is Xi, there is the opportunity that if we all work together, we can improve things at a global level and create higher equity. I'd like to end with the words of Satish Gopal in his 2016 letter to the New England Journal of Medicine. Shooting for the moon is important, but so is shooting for a world that is just and equitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suzanne, for completing it in time. And I don't see any questions posed in the question box. However, if there's any person who would like to, I'll just open up for one question or a comment, because we're getting a little change in sequence because of lack of time, and we would have Dr. Parmesh coming on next. Is there any question typed out? Anyone for it? I think we haven't got any of that. I think, Suzanne, you made a great point about collaborating and brought out the differences and similarities in the globe across. So with that, I'll request the second speaker, Dr. Pramesh, to please come on and give his talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanitkar, and thank you, Santosh and Dr. Kopikar, for the invitation. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you for accepting my request to be bumped ahead, because I have another meeting at 6:15 and I apologize for this. So what I'll be speaking about in the next 15 minutes is something that's core to the theme of what this meeting is all about, which is team science. And I'll use the example of the National Cancer Grid, which we've developed over the last 8 years to illustrate just how important it is to work as a collaborator and not just in silos. So the reason the National Cancer Grid originated was this heat map of close to 75,000 patients who visited the Tata Memorial Center over a 6-month period. And as many of you know, we are located in Mumbai. So this density of population that you see in and around the city of Mumbai in the state of Maharashtra is quite understandable. while this pretty heavy density of patients coming in from the north, the east, and the northeast of India is, to be honest, fairly disturbing, because for those of you who may not know, the time it takes for a person to travel from this bit in Nahar Lagoon in Arunachal Pradesh up to Mumbai could be anywhere up to 2 to 3 days, and this is even if they took flights. So clearly, this points to a lack of access and quality care across the country, which to me seems extremely important. Combined with this is the fact that we have a projected increase of close to a 50% increase in the next 15 years. And this is with all cancers, absolute numbers going up. And therefore, the crisis is even more stark. So about 8 years back, the directors of 17 regional cancer centers from across India got together for a roundtable meeting at the Tata Memorial Center in 2012 to see if it was feasible to create a network of cancer centers across India with a few common goals. I'm happy to say that 8 years later, we've grown into a very large network which now covers the length and breadth of the country, and practically every part of the country is represented. Today, we are at 231 cancer centers. We've expanded our scope to include research institutions, patient groups, professional societies, and charitable organizations across the country, which between them treat over 700,000 new patients with cancer annually, which is roughly 60% of all of India's cancer burden. The three pillars on which the National Cancer Grid stands is uniform standards of cancer care, to develop trained human resource, and collaborative multicentric cancer research. One of the first activities that we undertook was the series of papers that we wrote for the Lancet Oncology as part of a commission on cancer care in India. And we went through epidemiology, the social context, the demography, the priorities of cancer research and how it compared to global results, and most importantly, the delivery of affordable and equitable cancer care in India, the challenges therein, and how we could probably provide some solutions. One of the first activities we undertook was guidelines, and I'm glad that Susie alluded to the resource stratified guidelines that Ben Anderson and his group did. So we currently have a set of resource stratified guidelines which are specific to India. They are up on the NCG website. This is the second version of the guidelines that we've developed. And we are working closely with Imperial College and the Center for Global Development to work towards a rapid health technology assessment evaluation to guide our resource stratified guidelines. Happy to say that these guidelines have now been embraced by the Ayushman Bharat, which will now link its reimbursements to adherence to the NCG guidelines, which by itself promotes a level of evidence-based medicine, which was otherwise quite lacking both in the national healthcare system as well as in the PMJ program. One of the few baby steps we took towards a more robust health technology assessment was this choosing wisely approach, where we look at identifying low value or harmful practices that should be avoided in cancer care. And we came to a list of 10 of these practices which are commonly performed, have low value, are expensive, increase treatment costs, but have not been shown to be of benefit. And we published this a couple of years back. Quality control and quality assurance is central to the theme of what the National Cancer Grid believes in. And therefore, one of the few activities that we started very early on is a surgical pathology EQUAS program. So many of you and your institutions may have been part of the College of American Pathologists accreditation program, which is a similar exercise. But those of you who've been part of it might realize that it's an extremely effort-intensive, time-consuming, and an expensive affair, with the result that very few cancer centers actually participate in it. So what we created is a web-based online platform where we look at quality assurance in surgical pathology, which is a leaner version of the CAP accreditation, and it is offered free of cost to any center which is a member of the National Cancer Grid. We all know the value of second opinions and expert opinions in cancer care. And to overcome the hurdles of having to travel long distances just to get a second opinion, we've created this online platform called Navya, where experts from within the Tata Memorial Center and the National Cancer Grid bring evidence-based expert treatment decisions. So what a patient does is to upload his or her reports onto a secure website, and this can include DICOM images, pathology slides, and so on. It is put into a structured format by a backend which is courtesy our tech partner Navya, and sent across to an expert within the cancer grid, who then shares his or her opinion back to the patient, all within a median turnaround time of 24 hours. So far, we've offered more than 35,000 opinions, and surprisingly, 20% of these opinions have been international, though this was initially meant for patients within India, and 23 of the 60 countries that have taken opinions from Navya are actually high-income countries. So clearly, the need for a second opinion, an expert second opinion, is not limited to low and middle-income countries. All of us who work in cancer know the benefits of a multidisciplinary team. And unfortunately, some of the smaller centers lack the bandwidth to be able to create a real multidisciplinary team within their center. So we again leverage technology to create virtual tumor boards, which we run 3 times a week, a total of 5 hours a week, within which member centers can send in their complex cancer cases to be discussed with an expert group. So at any given point of time, we have anywhere from 25 to 40 centers participating in this, and anywhere from 120 to 150 experts from across the country weighing in with their opinions. We believe in working together as a group and negotiating as a group as well. So we've negotiated hard with publishers to be able to offer access to journals and textbooks related to cancer at 10% of what it would cost for an individual center to subscribe for these journals, therein bringing continuing medical education right up to the doorsteps of these centers. We also leverage the fact that we are a healthy consortium of major cancer centers and aggregate the resources that we have within our cancer center libraries to be part of a discovery tool, which then offers this again free of cost to all its member centers. We've created a massive open online course which increases access to education in cancer and training opportunities, which is again not nearly as big as any of the major MOOCs programs that you know, like edX or Coursera, but nevertheless making an impact with over 1,000 hits practically on a weekly basis. We know that distances in India are challenging, so we flipped the system around as far as continuing medical education is concerned, and what we call the traveling school of pathology actually takes the best practices in surgical pathology, whether it be grossing, reporting, or the quality of equas that we do across to the center, rather than expect them to be part of a large conference in any of the major cities. Research is core to what we work on, and there are several of our initiatives which we've done over the last few years. Our mandate is to promote context-specific research for low and middle-income countries. We've made systematic efforts to identify gaps in evidence, and once the gap is identified, conduct well-planned trials to address those gaps and answer those questions. We're also very heavy on building research capacity by way of training, and in a few small efforts to facilitate the actual conduct of the research itself. The National Cancer Grid does fund research projects, provided these preconditions are met. It needs to be a multi-centric collaboration. We do not fund single center studies. The cancer being studied needs to be something which is unique or common to India or low middle income countries. If it is an interventional study, it needs to be a cost-effective intervention so that if proven to be effective, it is readily implementable without cost being a consideration. All researchers who are funded by the National Cancer Grid have to commit to share their data in the public domain after completion of the study so that other researchers can benefit and mine the data and come up with newer findings. Public and patient involvement is a must increasingly, and we realize that there is nothing for the patient without the patient. We've created a clinical trials unit and an academic contract research organization which help researchers go through the nuts and bolts of doing research. There is help with study designs, with biostatistics, help with regulatory submissions, health ministry screening committee approvals, contracts with multicentric studies, insurance policies for clinical trials, and not the least, monitoring as well. This has been one of our most successful endeavors. This is a workshop which runs over 6 days in Lonavala, which is midway between Mumbai and Pune. Several of the participants here have been participants here or faculty here. So what happens is that a participant comes in with a one-page research concept, which is a germ of an idea in his or her mind, and over a period of 6 very intensive days gets converted into a full-fledged protocol, which is ready for ethics submission. It's a kind of a boot camp for how research protocols need to be written. We are very, very collaborative. We do not want to duplicate efforts. We've recently signed an MOU with the Department of Biotechnology towards cancer research. We recently had a call with the Secretary of the DBT, wherein we are likely to launch a joint call for proposals for cancer research, which meet the mandate of the National Cancer Grid, as well as the Department of Biotechnology, looking at similar outputs. We've expanded our scope and looked globally as well. Based on requests from several international colleagues, we have launched the Center for Global Health under the National Cancer Grid, which was launched in the last IAEA meeting by the Secretary of the Department of Atomic Energy. And over 13 countries and organizations have become part of this effort, and we're working closely with them in sharing our best practices, and we look forward to more collaborations. Some of our future steps, and actually this is not so future anymore. Just yesterday, we had a discussion with the Department of Biotechnology about jointly creating a rare cancer registry and an exceptional responder registry. We've already completed our first round of negotiation as a group for drugs, which have landed up with substantial discounts in the range of 50 to 55% from the MRP. We, as I mentioned earlier, partnered with the Center for Global Development and Imperial College for a robust health technology assessment program, which will build our capacity in health economics and also guide our resource stratified guidelines. As I mentioned, this has been a huge team effort. None of this would have been possible without the excellent cooperation we've had from several organizations which are listed in this slide, notably the Department of Atomic Energy, the Tata Trusts, Cancer Research UK, the MRC Clinical Trials Unit, ASCO, King's College London, and the Department of Biotechnology, amongst several others. So this is where we stand now. As I mentioned, 230 centers across the length and breadth of the country, which between them treat 60% of all of India's cancer burden. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Dr. Kanekar, are you?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for that excellent overview, giving a huge network and a grid that's available, and how Tata Memorial's expertise is reaching every individual across the country, and also in faculty development and promoting research. Are there any questions? Let me just see the chat box if there are. Yeah, I think there's a question from Dr. Sunil Badwe that how can NRIs assist in this? Would you like to take that?
Certainly. We've been supported by a large group of extremely collaborative individuals, whether they be NRIs, whether they be people within India, whether they are people from other countries. And I think this has been key to the way we've progressed over the last 8 years. I know for a fact that several of the faculty here, several of the participants here have been integral to the success of the National Cancer Grid. And the key to success has been that it's an extremely flat structure. We don't have a hierarchy, which is pretty unusual for an Indian organization. We don't look at it as Tata Memorial driving it. It's been a group of very committed cancer centers, research institutions, and patient groups which have forged their way. And if you look at practically every initiative that I've just mentioned, almost none of them originated from the Tata Memorial. They were all suggestions which came up from the member organizations and which we felt was worthwhile supporting. And to me, that's been key to why we have expanded the way we have.
How about the ICMR is also running some cancer genomics and cancer grid? So is this this thing with that? Are you collaborating with them, or that they're also doing a parallel kind of?
So several of our member centers as well as faculty are part of the ICMR effort, but that is actually a parallel effort. In fact, as we speak, there is an MOU that we have sent across, a draft MOU which we have sent across to the ICMR. So that's similar to our collaboration with the Department of Biotechnology. Yes. We get into a collaboration with the ICMR as well, because for cancer, at least, I see the National Cancer Grid driving a large part of the activities, and it seems most logical to work together rather than separately.
I think that's an excellent initiative, and I second that, because if we can have a database which is common and created along with it, would be an excellent repository. Again, collaborating with this too, because DBT was one, and I'm glad that you're taking it with ICMR as well. Thank you so much, Pramesh. I don't think there are any other questions, because I think everyone's quite overwhelmed and happy with the extensive collaboration that you already shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, though.
Yeah. With that, I move on to the next, and this thing, we are again changing. We are going in a slightly with skip lesions, and we have Dr. Sekhar coming in next with the Genome Asia 100K, a genomic resource for cancer research and precision medicine. Dr. Sekhar, the screen is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mathuri. I want to thank Santosh and colleagues in Pune and the TCGA for the invitation to speak about the Genome Asia project. The guidance I was given was to kind of, with the theme of the meeting about collaboration, so I'll try and give some context and also talk a little bit of science in terms of stuff. So the foundation that I represent does a lot of science and outreach work. It organizes a lot of education meetings, and normally we usually host the NGBD meeting in India, but unfortunately, because of the COVID, we had to postpone it, and hopefully we'll be all able to meet in person in maybe end of next year, hopefully. So having said that, I'm going to launch into this Genome Asia project. And what this slide, I don't need to explain to this audience, and I know there are people probably from outside of India. India is a land of diversity, and that is an enormous strength. Only in India you would see a truck carrying an elephant in the middle of the traffic, or you would see the variety of food, the kinds of language, the music, the religion, and name it. And I think there is an enormous amount of population diversity, which I think goes back to its history. There is over 4,600 anthropological groups, so 530 tribes, and the history dates back to over 70 generations or 2,000 years, and there's a shared ancestry in endogamy. And people have been fascinated, and particularly India is considered a crucible for genetic studies, and unfortunately it's not fully leveraged because India has a lot it can share with the world. And also, as I mentioned in the previous slide about language and the language groups, there's over 121 languages spoken by at least 10,000 people or more. And if you filter it or expand this and say how many languages actually exist, it's over 400 or so. But the number of people that speak that are pretty minimal. And also another mind-boggling statistic is we have about 25 million live births in India every year, and that's about the population of entire Australia every year. It's with a population of 1.3 billion people, the kind of genetics and the science one can do that can help both people in India and humanity is immense. And of course, the Human Genome Project concluded in 2001. It created the first reference genome. It cost us $3 billion at that time. And it used a really old technology, but once this reference genome was available, colleagues, both at IGIB, including Mitali and my other friends there, and colleagues in the field, and Tangraj and Laljit Singh, along with David Reich, used an array-based technology because there was a reference genome, and they could at least give us a glimpse of the population history of India. Still, this was only the beginning, and there was a lot of work to be done in understanding the intricacies of India's population. And it has implications both for cancer research and also other biomedical applications of genomics. And of course, fast forward after the Human Genome Project, over the last 15 years or so, the sequencing throughput, DNA sequencing throughput has dramatically increased. The cost has come down. And what used to cost $3 billion, and even somewhere around 2005 to the genome, it would be about $5 million. And today, because you have a reference genome, you can get away with about $100,000 or less. And so this was an enormous opportunity. And I was very fortunate to be in the middle of this entire evolution of sequencing technologies, starting right before the Human Genome Project took off very seriously. And I was fortunate not only to work with the human genomes, but also with cancer genomes. And we published something around in 2010. But around this time, I had a chance meeting with Sam Santosh, who's pictured here. And we had a discussion about, what should we be doing in terms of pushing the genomic science in India. And one thing that came clear to me was we should sequence a genome, because by then, there were Korean genomes, there were Chinese genomes, and India was nowhere in the map. So we started an earnest effort to do that. It was, again, in collaboration with a number of folks from India and outside India, and some of whom I have highlighted here, who continue to work with us in the Genome Asia project. And we published our genome, and a few months before, colleagues at IGIB also published, they published a male genome from India. We did a female genome from southern part of India. And that was sort of the start, but this got us thinking a little bit more as to what can we do. Still, genome sequencing was quite expensive. And again, chance brought me to Spain, where Partha Majumdar, who's shown on the top here, his colleagues were presenting at this meeting about population diversity in India. So we had a number of discussions at this meeting. Myself, my colleague Andy Peterson, and later on Mahesh, and my good collaborator from Singapore, Stefan Schuster, basically, we got together and we said, we got to do something. We got to collect samples and got to sequence. And Partha said, I already have samples. If you guys want to work together, we can actually make this happen. And of course, there were some crazy ideas thrown about getting on a bus or a train going across India collecting samples. But fortunately, we didn't have to do or endure that kind of effort. And so the rest was all a little bit of history. But even as I'm talking about this, even today, if you look in population databases, the representation of non-European data sets is quite low. And that's what these three little graphs in different ways are trying to show. And the reason you need this missing diversity filled in is precisely for cancer research, or for that matter, assessing risk scores for cancer or any other sorts of cardiac or liver disease and other stuff. You can use non-relevant ethnic references, but these risk scores tend to be performed pretty poorly. Not only that, and I think there is a lot to be discovered working with populations that are underrepresented in the current data set. So with this sort of a background, in about 2016, we had a meeting in Singapore. We met with colleagues in San Francisco, where I spent a good part of my time, and also in India at NIBMG and other parts in Bangalore. And there's just a map on your left showing at least a small representation of colleagues from various places that were phenomenally helpful, wanted to contribute, and some contributed the data, and others contributed in time and opportunity in terms of analysis. And on the right are some of the pictures from those early days of this thing. And there were several meetings that happened to make all of this possible. And fast forward, luckily, after a bit of endurance test on our part with a number of reviews and rejections. We finally managed to get this data set put out in the public domain and published late in 2019, December of 2019 to be exact. And the paper described 1,267 genomes. A large majority are actually from India. The total data sets represents about 290 population groups. The very large number of SNPs that were put out in the public domain along with indels. And about 23% of the protein altering variants that were from this data set were not previously reported. And again, adding to our knowledge in terms of the resource. And zooming into India, this 600 odd samples that I was talking to you about, it represented 55 population groups. This is still a small part of it, but it represents all the 5 major language groups. We also had samples from Pakistan. There was about 12 population groups. The population groups from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal also represented, but they're smaller in number. Nevertheless, this data set was an enormous resource in terms of kinds of things we can do. Since the paper is published, I'm not going to bore you too much with the fine details, and I'm sure one can go online and look it up. But what I want to say, immediately how the application of this data set. So there's an example where we were working with Dr. Mohan and Mohan Diabetes Research Center in Chennai, where we were sequencing samples from patients, maturity onset diabetes patients. So we had completed the sequencing. We had initially analyzed the data with the variants from Nomad. But as soon as we had the variants from this Genome Asia project, we were able to apply that. And what you see on the right, on your left here, is about half of the variants that were in the original filter list were common population polymorphisms from an India context. And in fact, a previous variant that people thought was relevant in the context of Modi turned out to be actually a common polymorphism in India in that population group. So again, this is one application. There have been many, many more series of stuff that have happened. And I'll give you a couple of more cases of how we applied this. This is another data set. This is part of the paper where we were looking at variants from India, looking for medical relevance. On the left in the map, it was very obvious there are specific beta thalassemia relevant variants that were enriched. On the right in this quilt plot, each column, basically each row represents a gene, and you can actually see there are some cancer relevant genes like BRCA1 and 2. These were incidental findings, but we were able to see these particular variants beginning to pop up in even common population samples that we were sequencing. We dwelled deeper into this data set and started asking the relevance of pharmacological variants that can have impact on drug metabolism. And in fact, we found a number of variants, some enriched in different parts of South Asia, in particular in populations that are highly endogamous. And these are the implications in treating these people with these particular drugs shown on the right. Another important thing that came was because of these population structure of India, there is an enormous opportunity for genetic disease-relevant gene discovery. You would know that the Finnish population is a great example where many, many discoveries have been done, and that's partly to do with the population history and the inheritance of blocks of DNA in that population. And some of the story is also seen in the context of India, where even in large urban populations, where you have over 9 million people, these people carry blocks of DNA that are common between individuals, making them much more closely related to each other than anyone else outside of that group. And what that means in these situations, you have an opportunity to discover disease-relevant genes very, very rapidly. And some of this work is now, as part of the phase 2, is ongoing. So while we were doing this effort, I was very, fortunate to collaborate with Kumar Prabhash at Tata Memorial, where he had a family of lung cancer patients and inherited lung cancer mutations. This is a family tree. he had asked if he could sequence and identify, what was the underlying causal variant or the risk variant. And when we did the exome sequencing on the right, I'm showing a filtering scheme. Again, underneath it, as soon as we got the exome data, we were able to subtract out all the common variants and some of the variants relevant to populations in India using the Genome Asia data set. And we found a variant in the famous oncogene HER2. And when I shared this with Kumar, he didn't tell me much. And months later, he came back and told me, I treated actually the patient with a very specific drug that targets this HER2 mutation. And you can see a lung scan on the left before treatment and after treatment. This patient had a remarkable recovery and had a better quality of life much longer than it was anticipated at that time. So very recently, again, I was quite fortunate to work with a number of colleagues across Asia, in particular, many colleagues in India, and cancer that is much more regional, particularly in parts of India and Northeast and Korea and Japan and Chile. We sequence this, and since we had the Genome Asia data, we could right away apply the filtering scheme like in other sorts of stuff and eliminate some of the variants and come up with driver mutations in the specific cancer. And this has implications for treatment. Again, it's published very recently, so I won't bore you with it. But the point, again, the Genome Asia data set has been incredibly valuable in doing some of this work. The phase 2 part of this work has commenced. We actually have another part of the paper that's gone out, and there's over 3,000 odd samples, much finer population stratification. And we have been able to use this data actually now to start building some tools that will enable biomedical discovery in India. And one of them is the Sargam array. This is a genotyping array. In fact, I told you, Tangaraj and colleagues started in about 2009 with a genotyping array from AFI. It's the same technology, but fast forward, applying some of the Genome Asia data and creating a very targeted array that performs better in terms of imputing, figuring out the South Asian genome, particularly genomes in India, for a much lower cost. And this array has a number of variants, including protein coding variants, over 500,000 GWAS relevant variants, and a number of other things. And we even managed to include some COVID susceptibility variants in this chip. And this chip is now out, and there's work beginning. And this is being used to do GWAS studies and also polygenic risk scores that are relevant to India. And for those of you who are interested in accessing the data, the Genome Asia data is available to anybody that wants to use it for research purposes. There's a browser that was built. You can do searches. You can apply and get the entire data set to do your own work. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work with a large number of people across multiple continents, and in particular, many, many colleagues in India that I'm grateful. And I'm very privileged to actually represent Genome Asia at this sort of forum. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to thank all of the Genome Asia members and also all our participants that provided samples. And I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Somashekar. This was an excellent overview of the Genome project. I do not see any questions typed in here, but I would just like to add to the fact that how is this going to be part of the Indian Genome project that has been launched by the DBT? Is it going to be collaborating, or is it going to be part of it?
I don't know much about the Indian Genome Project, to be frank, but we'd be happy to work with anybody that's interested in working with us.
Yeah,
There's
because
absolutely no reason.
It's so important, like our Honorable Health Minister announced about the Atmanirbhar, that we identify these mutations for really getting into precision medicines. And we've seen in the first speaker's presentation how the age and presentations of different cancers are different. So I guess we would have to tailor our own therapies from this, and I think that would be very interesting. So I'll just check back if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we would. No, I don't think there is any. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Angaraj, I'll answer your question. We can exchange emails. There's a question
Yes,
from Angaraj.
thank you so much. Thank you
No
so
problem.
much. And with that, I think we'll go on to the next speaker. We are having Dr. Pritha Rajaraman coming in about the Indo-US Cancer Research collaboration. So, Pritha, the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Madhuri. And so actually, I'll be speaking on a topic that's a little bit broader, but bring it around to cancer research. I'll start by thanking Santosh and Shashi and all of the other organizing partners for convening yet again such an impressive group of scientists and clinicians and policymakers. But perhaps even more impressive than the gathering itself is the work that's happened between the very first TCGA meeting that was just a year ago and now, despite the significant challenges of operating under a pandemic, the Indian Cancer Genome Atlas has still managed to establish a national consortium of India's top research institutions, built a parallel US consortium of experts, holds several advanced methods training, just to name a few. And looking at the growth of this impressive collaboration between scientists from India, from the United States, and from the rest of the world, I'm reminded that driving innovation to solve health and biomedical challenges, not just for our two countries, but really globally, has been one of the oldest areas of cooperation between the US and India. If you think about it, together we tackled smallpox elimination in the 1970s, the HIV pandemic and AIDS in the 1980s, polio eliminations in the 1990s. We jointly developed the first indigenous vaccine against rotavirus in 2015, and most recently have been closely collaborating on our global COVID-19 response. And one of the things that I think is really interesting actually is how many parallels that has with how we can be working together in cancer. If you think about this time last year when we held the first Indian TCGA meeting, who would ever have imagined what could have happened in the 12 months intervening? And as of this morning, we all know that there's more than 65 million confirmed cases of COVID, 1.5 million deaths, with the US and India being two of the most affected nations in the world. But I think rather than dwell on sort of the gloom and doom, what has been so impressive about this is how science has just jumped together to address the problem. And each of our nations really brings common strengths to the table. And if you look at a lot of our long-standing partnerships, we've addressed every different aspect of this pandemic. For example, we have our US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, that has been doing pandemic preparedness for years. And, they've jumped into the trenches here with a lot of the frontline workers to prevent, detect, and respond to COVID-19 using field training, infection prevention control, lab strengthening, etc. Our Food and Drug Administration has been working closely with our Indian regulators here to share information on regulatory approvals for vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics as they become available. And perhaps most relevant for this gathering here, our National Institutes of Health has been working very closely with Indian partners through a 30-year-old vaccine action program, as well as other initiatives, to conduct research and development to address key questions, including sharing expert advice and resources for vaccine candidates, developed both in the US and here. And finally, as we move towards finding solutions, the private sectors have also played a role. And as many of you have doubtless read in the newspaper, several Indian institutions and companies have joined US companies and institutions to develop, test, and promote large-scale manufacturing of affordable solutions. And this is really key because I think, as several of our speakers have pointed out previously, these collaborations are so key to ensuring access to safe and effective drugs and other treatment and detection modalities really across the world. And so, I'll move now from the pandemic. And even though on the face of it, this pandemic and, the complex problems facing from cancer seem like very different issues, there are very important similarities in our strategy to tackle this. In the beginning of this year, we were in this very unusual situation where each one of us, regardless of where we were or who we were facing a common and unprecedented challenge with no easy answers. And actually, if you really think about truly understanding and treating cancer effectively around the world, there's no one answer from one region of the world. The types of cancers are different and they present differently in the world. Circumstances, comorbidities, our underlying host genetics are different. And so the ability to leverage global resources and expertise is really essential to our tackling of this problem as well. If you think of the Cancer Genome Atlas led by the NIH to date in the US, apart from being a landmark project that generated key insights into the fundamental nature of cancer biology, it also, at the same time, led to improved cancer classification, the development of new diagnostic methods and therapeutic approaches, and set standards for the most rigorous scientific principles regarding research integrity, rigor, reproducibility, sample sharing, and very careful evaluation of the ethical, legal, and social issues pertaining to emerging biological innovation. So as the ICGA grows, Santosh asked me, what are some of the things, that we should be thinking about? Certainly, I think the opportunity to answer unique scientific questions that cannot be answered elsewhere should be, and I know is, one of your very top priorities. But at the same time, I think this is an opportunity to simultaneously create an enabling ecosystem for these innovations, which means ensuring sufficient and sustainable funding for this research, building and nurturing a skilled scientific workforce, deployment of big data and digital health, at the same time ensuring data sharing in a way that is accessible and interoperable, making sure there are efficient regulatory approvals and working very closely with the regulators from the beginning as we move from the bedside to hopefully the bedside to make sure this is a seamless walk as opposed to one with stops and starts along the discovery process. And most important, and I think, again, we've heard this repeatedly from our speakers, to ensure the accessibility and affordability of all of these discoveries. And in fact, coming back to what have we learned from, working together on the pandemic and so many other issues over the last year, it is this, that no one of us holds the solution. And even in terms of the drugs and the vaccines that we have been developing, they may be developed in one part of the world, but there's another part of the world that has either the scientific capacity or the manufacturing capacity to really bring it to global access. So with that, I will wish all of you all the very best and assure you that we as the US remain very, very committed to working with all of you on this journey of discovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pritha, for really starting off with the pandemic, because whether it's a conference of cancer genomics or this, I think we cannot, because I think this pandemic taught us a lesson of really working together. it was only this working together that brought the vaccine within 10 months, which is an historic event and the first time of its kind, including the mRNA vaccine, which has come up for the first time. So I think that is very true. And I reinforce what you said is, we have a huge population and numbers. So with the big data, and if we have a standardized process of sharing this data, a lot of information can come out through collaboration and in quick time. So I think that was very, very nice. And are there any questions? Let me just check the box for it. No, I think everyone agrees with you. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll move on to the last speaker in this wonderful session that we had. And that's, I think, a recorded talk from Dr. Rodrigo Dientzman. So can I have that started off, please?
My name is Rodrigo Dientzman, and I'm a medical oncologist. I work at the Vardhan Institute of Oncology in Barcelona, Spain, and also Oncoclínicas Precision Medicine in São Paulo, Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil, and I worked for many years with collaborative consortia for multi-omic biomarker development and validation in cancer. I'm going to give you a more clinically oriented perspective of drug biomarker development for precision oncology. These are my conflicts of interest. So the number of biomarkers that you can, across different diseases, match to multiple therapies continues to grow. When I started oncology a decade ago, it was a handful of biomarkers and also 5 tumor types, 5 drugs, and things have become really complicated now, from simple gene alterations to genomic signatures, as you can see the last 3 biomarkers. Emerging biomarkers, very, very close to clinics, are also here. They can be matched to different clinical trials and sometimes off-label use of therapies. We are really in a turning point of the number of genomically guided therapies. As you can see here, it evolved in the last decade or so in a way that now we have 42 gene biomarkers, 59 drugs, and if you consider late-stage clinical development, the number of drugs is 89, and 58 biomarkers that you can easily match to therapies. We are also at the turning point for the outreach of genomically guided therapies. It was a linear growth up until now, where we start to see things becoming really important, where you can directly match therapies to multiple disease types and give benefit to a substantial proportion of the patients. And also considering late-stage clinical development, 1 out of 3 patients would be benefit from genome-informed therapy. And we have essentially all diseases now with tissue-agnostic biomarkers where you can see relevant implications. But the problem is that only a minority of the alterations are commonly found in patients. The majority of the alterations that we see are extremely low prevalence. This is a reality for precision oncology. What we are using at the clinics now is next generation sequencing with small hotspot panels that in some diseases makes complete sense, given the availability of drug and eligibility to clinical trials, while in other settings, we are moving towards really whole exome sequencing and signatures. But the majority of the cases, we go for hybrid capture-based NGS panels with 2, 3, 4, 500 genes. These are giving most of the answers that we need. Detection of the 4 main classes of genomic alterations: copy number, insertion deletions, fusions, and mutations, but also the signatures, homologous recombination deficiency, microsaccharide instability, tumor mutation burden, with a good coverage, reasonable turnaround time. Cost is to be discussed, depends on the context, but all important, manageable amount of information with a comprehensive genomic profiling is 2 to 500 gene panels that now are commonly used. And we are moving more and more towards not using only DNA, but also RNA-based tests for fusion detection. They are extremely relevant, critical for precision medicine, and only RNA can give you insights for new partners, fusion partners. I'll give you one example how it evolved in lung cancer, the multiplicity of biomarkers now that we can match to different therapies. And if we start with a single gene test, sequential, and it's PAM negative, and for adenocarcinomas in light or non-smokers, 65% of those in a cohort of close to 100 cases had additional actionable alteration missed by non-NGS methods, and these are relevant biomarkers. So one of the reasons why in some diseases we go directly to next generation sequencing, also now across diseases there is evidence, at least theoretical, maybe not pragmatic, but theoretical increase in the actionability or the proportion of patients that you in silico could match to multiple therapies in clinical development. The increase goes from 30 to 60 to 70% in actionability rate. And we have discoveries every year, as I was mentioning, fusions and hotspot mutations in rat, very rare across multiple diseases, but in some thyroid cancers, very frequent. And we had, up until now, very promiscuous drugs, non-selective RAT inhibitors. Now we have super selective RAT inhibitors with activity response rates close to 70%. And this is also seen not only in lung cancer, but also thyroid cancer, not only fusions, but also the hotspot mutations, refractory disease. So extremely relevant for super selected populations. The same we see with extract fusions in a tumor agnostic biomarker. Some diseases extremely high, almost pathognomonic, others less frequent, but found in any cancer, essentially, and some pediatric malignancies as well. And the response rates from 60 to 70, 80% with existing therapies. We also have immunotherapy biomarkers that we use based on genomic signatures. The first is microsatellite instability, with a response rate with PD-1 inhibitor around 40%, and the same drug in a tumor mutation high context. The cutoff here is 10 mutations per megabase with a commercially available test. Across different diseases, you see 30% response rate. That is very durable with many complete responses, also telling me that we are hitting very hard in some of these tumors, very promising biomarker. And then on top of that, another signatures of relevance. Now we are not looking at only one alteration, BRCA1 or 2. We are looking at really many DNA damage repair and molecular recombination pathway alterations. Example here is in prostate cancer with PARP inhibitors, very nice responses and increase in survival, and with the same therapies in breast cancer with somatic mutations. You can see the alterations here. So 50% response rate. Another disease where genomics is becoming the rule is biliary tract cancers. And here you can see, for example, FGFR fusions, BRAF mutations, giving targeted inhibitors or combinations, extreme activity in terms of response rate. So we have now reached a point where there is no purpose of looking at single gene biomarkers in a sequential way, but instead, because we have tumor suppressors that are actionable, because we have complex genomic signatures, there is increased need for NGS panels, big panels, that take into account these multiple alterations. And then the projection is that by 2024, we will have more than 10 tissue-agnostic biomarkers approved. These are, like you saw, the N-track fusions, MSI, now to mutation burden, but we soon have FGFR fusions. These are projections. Homologous recombination deficiency, other DNA damage repair alterations and fusions, and regulin, RET, ROS. These are all becoming then tissue-agnostic biomarkers that require comprehensive genomic profiling. So this is really the norm, the rule now. And ESMO has issued some guidelines on how to use next-generation sequencing.